Good morning, everyone. My name is Victoria Wood, and today we are going to be discussing what is the function, defining the relationship of behavior. So the first thing that we are going to talk about today is finding the function. And when we're talking about finding the function, we are referring to looking at why a person may be doing a specific behavior or action. And we do this by using an ABC analysis. So the first thing that we want to talk about is why we do what we do. So everything that we do for a reason. And when we are looking at the why occurrence of a behavior, we look at manipulating one or more components of a three-term contingency, which we also refer to as our ABC analysis. And this is an example here of our ABC model, or using an ABC analysis to figure out that why for a behavior occurring. So we break it down into three separate parts. First is going to be our A, or the antecedent, and that is anything that will precede a behavior in time. And then we have the B portion of the model for behavior, and that is the activity of living organisms. And finally, the C portion of our model, or the consequence, and that is the event that follows immediately after a behavior in time. So first we'll start with antecedents, and these can be verbal directives like, for example, go put your shoes on, go sit down, put your hands down, or any instruction. It can also be environmental changes. So if it is too hot or too cold in a room, or even the weather making a person feel depressed. And then we also have the presence or absence of people, and that could be, for example, having dad at home, the teenager works, versus mom is at home and can't get her to listen. Or maybe a mom leaves, a child becomes upset, dad enters, child hits their head. Another type of antecedent could be the passage of time. So a child may be tired after a full day of school. For those who are not morning people, we prefer not to be talked to in the morning. If a child is engaging in challenging behaviors at certain times of the day, or only in the afternoon after being at school all day. All right, and then we're going to look at the B, which is standing for behavior. And that is the activity of living organisms, and that is the definition coming from Cooper, Heron, and Hayward from 2007. This is everything that a person does. And when we are talking about behavior, specifically for an ABC model, we really want to make sure that we have a target behavior in mind. So we are looking at a specific behavior, making sure it's something that we can observe and measure, with the goal of wanting to increase or decrease a behavior. And then next, we're going to look at consequences. So with that, as we know and have discussed, a consequence is what happens just after behavior, and it does not have to be planned. It could be completely coincidental, but it still is what occurred right after a behavior. So whatever has happened right after a behavior will determine if that child engages in the behavior again. So for example, we may have as a consequence something good happens, like earning money or tokens, a high five. We could have something aversive stops, for example, turning off your alarm clock in the morning or taking out the trash. Could also be something bad happening. We have electrocuted ourselves, or maybe getting a bad grade on a test. And then we also have where a consequence could be if something good has stopped. So the TV is no longer working or no longer turned on, and we no longer can find that money that we put in our wallet. So when we are talking about having something good happening or something aversive stopping, we can usually see an increase in those behaviors, which means that it is more than likely that the behavior will happen again in the future. Whereas vice versa, when we see something bad happening or something good stopping, it could decrease the behavior, which is making it less likely for it to occur in the future. Specifically today, we are going to focus on increasing appropriate behaviors by providing those consequences. All right, so consequences affect behavior in 3 ways. Like I said, they could increase a behavior, meaning that it's more likely to happen again in the future, and we call that reinforcement. For example, a child labels an item and you praise them. Therefore, in the future, that child may be labeling more things. We could also see a decrease in behavior, and that is where the behavior is less likely to occur again in the future. And that is also known as punishment. So, for example, the child hits his sister and is sent to his room. So, in the future, that child is less likely to hit their sister. Or we may have no change at the rate of behavior at all. So, a child may continue to hit his sister during the same activities, though nothing has changed. It is really important to note that we are learning how to identify through observation of the consequence, and then it will help us to be able to learn how to manipulate it. All right, so now you know what the ABC stands for, so let's look at how we use the ABC model. We need to look at the antecedents and consequences of the behavior we are focused on. So that means we are seeing what's reinforcing the behavior and why it's occurring. So in other words, we want to manipulate the antecedent and provide positive consequences. So we can use the ABC analysis to determine what those antecedents and consequences are. That helps us to look for the function. And as a basic rule, we want to provide antecedents and positive reinforcing consequences for desirable behavior, and where possible, remove or change antecedents that come before a problem behavior. So let's look at an example of using the ABC model. In this situation, what do you think would happen next time with the child? And this will depend if the consequence is punishing. We may think that it could be punishment because he was removed and reprimanded, but if he keeps engaging in the behavior, the consequence is not a punisher. But let's say you take some ABC data and this continues to happen. So here again, we have the antecedent, time to go home, behavior, runs away from mom and says no. Now we are focusing on what happens after the behavior, and we're generally a very focused society on consequences, and these are not positive consequences. We want to make sure that we are providing positive consequences for this. So this would be an example of consequences that may not be positive or looking more negatively. So we can look at modifying antecedent. So how do we do that? If we do this, we can do making a statement like, I'm thirsty, let's go get a drink. So if we do this, we are still able to provide positive consequences. So as you can see, mom goes ahead and says, I'm thirsty, let's go get a drink. The behavior changes and the child says okay and runs to mom. And as a consequence, that child gets praise and Kool-Aid when they arrive home. So other than looking at the antecedent, watch for stimulus control. And this means that something signals that reinforcement is available. And in this situation, we are looking at mom is present, Jake asks for money, mom gives him the cash. Next situation, dad is present, Jake asks for money, dad does not give him the cash. So this child, Jake, is then learning who will and will not provide him with that cash that he's asking for. and in turn teaching him to learn to ask for cash from mom. And maybe when dad is present, that signals that that money or cash will not be given or available. So let's look at a couple key points here. So we want to make sure that we are reinforcing behavior or it will not occur. If behavior is occurring, we want to make sure it's being reinforced in some way. Any given behavior at any given time is determined by what behavior has been reinforced in the past for this individual in similar circumstances. So we want to focus on modifying those antecedent first. We won't be able to provide help to the people who are depending on us until we understand what their behavior is, and that it's purposeful and can be changed. Until we learn to observe and define behavior in measurable ways, we can then modify behavior and help make those positive changes for someone. So in order for us to tell what is going on, it's really, really important in the field of applied behavior analysis, or ABA, that we take behavior or take data on behavior to figure out what is happening. We're able to document the antecedents and consequences, and really take a close look at what's going on and why a behavior is happening. So all behavior serves a purpose. And using our ABC analysis or ABC model, you're able to find the function or get a better idea of what that function is. And once we are able to find the function, we work then on modifying antecedents to change the behavior. Sometimes we may find that we can't change the antecedent, so then we look at modifying the consequences in these situations. So with ABA, again, you get the tools to determine the purpose of using an ABC analysis. Some of the functions that you may find could be for attention, escape, avoidance, a tangible, self-stimulatory. And we will go into specifics of those types of functions and addressing them. All right, and like I mentioned, looking at modifying antecedents, and when that's not possible, changing consequences. This may be in a situation where behavior has already occurred, or the antecedent is a skill that's needed to be taught. So how do we find the function? We use an ABC analysis. So the example that we have here is Sally is taken to the playground. When she gets outside, she's told, go play. She immediately runs and hits a child. The teacher then tells her, do not hit, you're going to time out. And this is the same procedure that she always follows. So what do you think, looking at our behavior? Sally hits a child. The antecedent was she was told to go play. So what should her teacher probably, or what will she probably do in the next instance? She will probably hit again. So instead, we want to walk out to recess with her and reinforce her for playing appropriately, but not allow her escape for hitting. So this is an example where you can't modify the antecedent. It's a skill that needs to be learned. So again, teaching appropriate play, not allowing escape, and walking out with her to the playground to prevent that hitting is how we can modify this area. All right, and we're going to look at another example here. So we have Albert is at the dinner table with his family. He's given food and told to eat. Albert doesn't eat, and then when his family is finished with their plates, Albert is allowed to leave the table. Mom is concerned because he has not been eating anything except for the snacks that she's given to him. So we're going to break this one down as well. So behavior was he does not eat. Antecedent was he was told to eat. The consequence that was provided was he gets to go play after dinner and get snacks in between meals. So what could mom probably do next time? Well, they could not offer snacks until he's eaten his food, and have him stay at the table until he takes at least one bite. So data sheets are the next area. This is an example of an ABC data sheet that you wouldn't use. They are extremely important when we have numerous people working with a child or in a child's daily life. We do have a column here for initials, and this is important because we may see a child is engaging in challenging behavior for only some people, and it can help us to keep an eye out for that stimulus control. You can include comments such as a date or time of day, um, and even if needed, there can be an additional column added for this. All right, next we are going to talk about decreasing the negative. Now, I know antecedents and consequences can affect behavior. I also know that something can have stimulus control, which causes behavior to occur. Now, how do I stop the negative behavior? So, we've already spoken about modifying antecedents and consequences, but let's get more in depth on how to do this. All right, so just as we mentioned previously, these are some of the purposes that a behavior may have. So, to gain attention, to escape, to avoid, to get access to a tangible, or self stimulatory. We are going to break these down. All right, so just as it sounds, with attention, a child is engaging in a behavior to seek out whether it's positive or negative attention from someone. So let's say after an ABC analysis, you find out that a child is engaging in behavior for attention. So here are some hints of attention-seeking behavior that may clue us into this type of function of behavior. So it may seem as if nothing was happening, and if attention is delivered, even reprimands, so even some of those negative responses or statements made, still attention, but the behavior continues to occur. So, for example, if you're telling a child to stop hitting me and they continue to hit you, this could be an option of, or I'm sorry, an example of attention. Okay, we are now going to just look at a quick example of when attention seeking behavior may be occurring. So, you guys just take a look at this and see if you can identify some of those hints that we discussed. Okay, so as you guys could see in that example, every time little one got out of mom's view, he intentionally got up, found her, went ahead, fell to the floor, and continued to cry. So you can kind of see here, even though mom was not really delivering any verbal attention, that behavior of dropping to the floor and crying was definitely a form of trying to gain that attention from mom. All right, so we are going to take another of an attention example here. So we have the antecedent is a mom is talking to a guest. The behavior is the child hits the guest. So as a consequence, mom says, "Don't hit." If this is attention seeking, what do you think will happen next time? So I'm sure, as you've probably guessed, more than likely, that child will continue to hit in order to get mom's attention, even when the guests are there. All right, so what do we do? We've got this ABC model. We're understanding that it's likely that that child will continue to hit more in the future if it's attention seeking. So what could we do and how can we modify this? So we could then look at modifying the consequence since the behavior had already occurred. And mom could do this by ignoring the hitting and move herself and the guest to a different location. All right, so next we are going to take a look at escape. And this is when a child is looking to, just as it sounds, avoid a situation, task, instruction, activity that they may be aware of that's coming up, or completely escape and get out of that less desired activity or task. It usually occurs just after a demand is placed. And again, it can also be avoidance. So, making statements like it's almost time for school, that can signal that we're about to, go somewhere that's maybe less preferred and not quite what we want to do. And that may signal the behavior or target behavior that we're looking at. It's really important when looking at escape maintained behavior that we are always carrying through with the instruction or demand and to not give attention for not following through. So here we're going to take a look at an escape example. So mom says, "Clean up your toys." The child then hits mom. And as a consequence, mom says, "Ouch, don't hit me," and puts that child in timeout. Mom ends up picking up the toys herself. And as a result, he never has to pick up his toys. So let's look at how we can fix this. So we can modify that consequence by having mom ignore the hitting and prompt the child to pick up the toys. Why do you guys think that she should ignore it? And as I'm sure you have all guessed and are thinking to yourselves, we want to make sure that we are ignoring this behavior because we don't want to create a new function of attention. So sometimes what we may see is a behavior is maintained for one specific reason, and we begin providing all this attention, sometimes unintentionally, but it happens. And as a result, that behavior now has a new maintained function or reason why it's occurring, which then becomes attention. All right. And next, we are going to talk about denied access. So, this is a type of function where a child or individual may not be getting a specific toy or tangible that they are wanting. So with this type of function, just to look out for some hints for behaviors that may be occurring for this reason. Again, it may be when that child is not getting what they want. It's really important that we do not ever give access to the items when inappropriate behavior has been observed. What we can do is give options of other items if they're not available, or if it's just an item that that child cannot have, just completely removing it out of their environment. So let's take a look at some denied access examples. So here we have our antecedent. Child sees a toy on the shelf. Mom says no. The behavior is the child cries, and as a consequence, mom gets him the toy. So if this is a function of denied access, we want to ignore the crying and continue to shop. And if it's a situation where the child can't have a toy, make sure that they have stopped crying before you're giving them that item. And another option as well is bring a different toy to offer them instead if that's not a situation where they can have that toy. And if mom knows that this is something that occurs frequently when going to the store, the mom may decide to just bring a toy for them to have as an option before this behavior even occurs. All right, and then we are going to look at self-stimulation. So this is when a behavior is occurring just to occur. So some hints for behavior controlled by self-stimulation. It's really important to figure out why that child enjoys engaging in that behavior and finding a competing reinforcer. So as an example, if a child is hand flapping, try to determine why they may like to hand flap and then find something more appropriate that can replace that reinforcement. For example, maybe it's because she likes wind in the face. So you could then buy a fan to produce that reinforcement, that feeling of wind in the face, just more appropriate way to get that sensation, or maybe finding a similar visual stimulus that could provide some similar visual reinforcement if it's more so of them enjoying seeing the hand flapping. We do want to try and block as much as possible. This can be done by blocking the response with your own hand or even redirecting a child by giving them something more appropriate to do with their hands. So what happens if you don't know the function? And this may happen sometimes too if our ABC data sheet is inconclusive and we're not able to find a clear function. First thing we want to do is just follow some common or basic practices. This includes not giving attention for inappropriate behavior. If there was an instruction or demand put in place, make sure that stays and we do not take that demand away. We want to remove all reinforcement. This means that if a child has a toy when attempting to bite, we want to try to remove that toy. And make sure that we do not allow access to reinforcement until they are being appropriate or give an appropriate response. All right, now we're going to take a look at increasing the positive while decreasing the negative. So moving past best practices, we want to look at some more intrusive behavior changing procedures. This will also help you to learn how to teach a child how to access reinforcement using appropriate behavior. So maybe the child doesn't want to clean up one item. Maybe he just wants to finish the game. How does he tell you? If they want the toy in the store, how do they get that if all they know is how to cry? If a child wants your attention but has only learned how to hit you for it, how else will he know how to get your attention? So remember, make sure we are looking at best practices, making sure that your child is attending before you give an instruction. Be prepared to provide prompts or assist in a task completion, but be aware too to try and fade those prompts. And that is, really important to help a child learn not to be dependent on you to always assist them in making that appropriate response. We can also use behavioral momentum, so giving some easy tasks before providing a harder task or instruction. Provide choices when able, and be aware of who is giving the demands. Maybe make sure that you're pairing yourself with a person who has stimulus control if a child or individual is not following through with your instructions, or just looking at making sure that we're following through. And these are some examples of reinforcement procedures. So we have functional communication training, or FCT, differential reinforcement of other behavior, differential reinforcement of alternative behavior, and non-contingent reinforcement. Today, we are just going to focus on functional communication training, or FCT. All right, so functional communication training, or FCT, is also considered part of best practices. We're teaching a child how to ask appropriately for what he or she wants. We want to teach that child how to access the reinforcement and ask for it. So the goal is to avoid or block behavior from occurring and teach a child how they can access it, reinforcement, using appropriate behavior. So for example, hitting mom because he wants attention. We want to not give any attention for hitting, but instead, as a replacement, teach that child how to ask appropriately. All right, so we are going to look back at our attention example for this. So we have mom who's talking to a guest, child hits the guest. As a consequence, we want to make sure that we have not reinforced the hitting by ignoring and moving locations. Utilizing FCT, we can next time have the child approach mom. Mom could block the hitting and say hi. And mom will say hi to teach that child to say hi or give a greeting, and then reinforce with attention for that appropriate response. All right. So in this example with escape, utilizing functional communication training. So we have this example here where a child is given a tough assignment. The child hits. So not reinforcing the hitting, we want to make sure that we ignore and make sure that the work is not removed. With FCT, we'd like to try and catch this before a child hits, teaching them how to say, I need help, or if needed, use some type of sign language or picture exchange communication system, or PECS as it's listed. It's also very important that we avoid accidental reinforcement. So we want to stick to the reinforcement program that you choose, or you may accidentally reinforce the wrong behavior and teach that individual that their inappropriate behavior gets what they want. So I'm going to give you examples of what this might look like. So Rebecca's mom is talking to another adult. Rebecca begins head hitting and mom runs over to show concern in order for her to stop. Rebecca is more likely to hit her head in the future because she's got mom's attention. All right, and then the next example here, Dad tells Emily to put on her shoes in order to leave. Emily says no and does not want to put her shoes on. So Dad gets a call rushing him out the door. He picks up Emily and her shoes and jumps to the car. So in the future, Emily is probably less likely to put her shoes on. So it's important to know what accidental reinforcement is so that if, for example, you give a demand, you know that you should prompt or help your child to follow through and provide the least amount of attention as possible while keeping your child safe. Life happens, but we want to set ourselves up for success, and knowing that maybe the morning may not be the best time to work on shoe tying with Dad and Emily, and in the evening there's more time. So what if reinforcement doesn't work? So some things that may commonly be said is, I've stopped giving reinforcement for inappropriate behavior. I've started reinforcing appropriate behavior and he's still doing it. Or I can't ignore his hitting all the time. It really hurts. I'm ignoring it, but I have to block and that's enough attention for him. I can't prompt him to complete the task. He's too big. Or it's just getting worse. So we are going to look at, I've stopped giving reinforcement for inappropriate behaviors, starting to reinforce appropriate, but it's still doing it and it's getting worse. This is referred to as extinction. So when you stop reinforcing inappropriate behavior, it can get worse, what we call as an extinction burst. but we want to give the reinforcement procedure some time. If you give in, you reinforce the behavior, that is even worse. So for example, with a Coke machine, we're going to look at this example and another example of head hitting in order to get a toy. All right, so here we have an individual who's gone up to their vending machine. He's put his money in. He's ready to go ahead and get his soda out. All of a sudden, he's looking for his soda and it has not come out. So then maybe he goes to shaking the vending machine. That hasn't worked. He's not getting his soda. Maybe then he moves to bring in a friend and they're both going to be shaking, kicking, doing whatever they can to get that soda out. Still not working. We bring even more people in, really try and get this thing shook up and hit, kick, whatever, but still not producing any type of Coke. All right. And then looking at head hitting with a toy. So maybe a child head hits, they get a toy, or they head hit, then they bang against their head against a wall, they hit their head with a hard object, or bang their head against the wall while hitting with a hard object. So in these examples, as I'm going through them, just keep in mind, I'm going to go back through and kind of explain how extinction works with some visuals to it. So we are going to go back to the Coke machine example here. So let's say that the individual puts his money in and it does not produce a soda. So he tries to go ahead and shake up the machine, doesn't work. However, when he brings a friend and they're both together and shaking that Coke machine, all of a sudden the Coke rolls out. What happens then? Well, now that individual has just learned that, you know what, in the future, if my soda is not coming out, I'm probably going to bring in a friend. And, last time that gave me my soda, my reinforcement. So that's what I'm going to go straight to next time is just bring in a friend, knowing that soda machine might not give me what I want. All right, and then looking at the example here with a child engaging in head hitting to get a toy. So if they are engaging in head hitting and they're no longer getting that toy, but when they're banging their head against a wall, that's not providing it either. Well, let's say he hits his head and then hits his head with a hard object, and all of a sudden he gets access to his toy that he wanted. We've now just taught that child that I need to engage in this response, the hitting my head hard with a hard object in order to get that toy. All right, and then back to our Coke machine example here. We have all these steps as well. They don't get their soda, they can't shake it, their friend can't shake it, but when they bring in everybody, that gives them access to the soda. Well, again, they've learned that the next time in the future, I'm going to skip all these steps because I know that doesn't give me what I want. So I'm going to go ahead and put my money in the Coke machine, and then I'm going to go ahead and bring my friends, and we're all going to shake it and kick it and do what we got to do, and that soda will come out. All right, and then looking back here at our example with head hitting to get access to a toy, if we find that child is engaging in head hitting, they figure, oh, that doesn't get me my toy. Now I'm going to bang my head hard against the wall. That doesn't do it. Now I'm going to do it with a hard object, hitting my head against the wall. And that gives me access to my toy. So again, if we are giving an item, that toy, right after this response, we are then teaching, in order to get that toy, I have to engage in this response to get it. All right, and then when we are looking at extinction, this is, let's say he puts soda or the money in the soda machine. These responses don't give him access to it, and neither does this one. So now all these responses that he's learned no longer give him access to what he wants, he is less likely in the future to use that soda machine because now he knows it does not matter what response that I'm giving. I've learned over time that I'm still not getting my soda, so I'm no longer going to engage in that behavior of putting that money in the machine because I know it's not going to give me access to my Coke. And in this example here with head hitting 2, if we are no longer reinforcing any of these responses, we are likely to see the head hitting decrease because it's not giving that child access to the toy. So again, central idea is here, we may see behavior get worse before it gets better. So we want to give those reinforcement procedures some time and be aware with Extinction Burst, we may see more intense behaviors occurring, but we really want to stick with our reinforcement procedure and not provide reinforcement for these more intense behaviors and accidentally reinforce. All right, so what if reinforcement doesn't work and you're saying, I can't ignore his hitting all the time, it really hurts? Well, first thing we can do is remove ourselves from the room if it is for attention, but also watch where you're placing yourself. So maybe stand behind the individual when presenting a demand if it's due to an instruction that you're giving. Or if you need to take a break, just make sure that you're always coming back to the original instruction if it is to escape or avoid. All right, so I'm ignoring it, but I have to block, and that's enough attention. Suggestion here would be to remove yourself from the room if safe to do so. If it is self-injurious behavior, we want to block but not look at that individual or say anything. So some of those more severe behaviors like self-injurious behavior can be very harmful. So we want to still be with them for safety, but provide the least amount of attention in that moment. All right, so if it is a situation where you're unable to prompt to complete the task because that child is too big, you can always present other tasks and come back to the original skill to build behavior momentum here. So we want to keep presenting the demand without prompts until that person or individual complies. All right, so we understand we're very much reinforcement and not punishment. So why is punishment not recommended? There are problems that come along with punishment procedures. So often emphasis is on punishing the person to teach them a lesson instead of focusing on how to decrease a behavior. We want to make sure that we are focusing on teaching a behavior that we want to see and avoid accidental reinforcement, like giving timeout when a child is wanting to escape an instruction or reprimanding a child when they're really wanting attention and so on. All right, so again, challenges with punishment procedures or implementation of punishment is that a punishment must be present. Sometimes increased amount of punishments is often needed, and that can be really harmful. It's only temporary. We want to make sure that we are teaching appropriate skills and replacement behaviors to truly stop that behavior. And we're also not giving the individual an opportunity to access reinforcement, which is really important that we do. And again, avoiding accidental reinforcement by knowing the function. And remember, it is only a punisher if it decreases behavior. All right, so do we think we have it? Just as a reminder, we want to make sure that we are aware of what we are doing. So remember, we said that whatever the child is doing at the time reinforcement is delivered is the behavior you have just functionally reinforced regardless of what you say. As same goes with punishment. So sometimes we say we are punishing one specific part of a behavior, but in fact, we end up punishing the entire response. So we can only tell by the future rate of behavior if that is the case. But for example, saying something like, I got the milk, but another individual's response is, well, you were late. Or a child says, I drew you a picture, mom, and the response is, you got marker all over your hands. Or eating all of your food, but then focusing on the fact that a child has messed up their clothes. as well, fixing their own lunch, but the focus or attention is on, well, you just dirtied up a whole bunch of dishes. So, as powerful as these can be, it's an even more common problem is simply letting behavior die out because we don't reinforce it or provide extinction. So, lots of examples of accidental reinforcement can occur in these situations. Um, another example here of accidental reinforcement: if a kid doesn't want to go to church, they act out, they get taken out of church and put in a nursery or taken home. Um, may not want to eat dinner, so they get a hot dog or granola bar served to them instead. These are just examples here of how accidental reinforcement may occur, and just some things to be aware of and mindful of as we are going through these things with our child. All right, guys. Well, I know that was a lot of information that we talked through. If you have any additional questions or comments, you are welcome to email me. I've provided my email here for you. I do ask that you guys refrain from asking any specific questions about individuals or your child. The reasoning behind this is in order for us to make suggestions or recommendations, we really need to be able to see and observe a behavior and take data on it with an ABC data sheet. So please feel free to ask me any general questions. Some examples may be, if you want to give an ABC data sheet a try and you're just not quite sure how to do it, or the components of it, we can go over that. Or if you have questions on a specific procedure like functional communication training or extinction, accidental reinforcement, those types of things, feel free to let me know, and I'm happy to help. All right. Well, I appreciate everyone coming here and being a part of this with me today, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.